In the early 1900s, folk music was the definitive indie genre. You didn't need a formal education in music or a giant marketing machine behind you, just a tune in your heart and a dusty guitar. Folk was a much-needed counter to the genres of high society. Violin and years of practice? Nah, you can make music and be a dirty hobo riding a train. Fucking yeehaw. Wouldn't you know it, 100 years later we got the same exact thing with dubstep. Just swap out the guitar for a laptop and the train with your parents' basement. Both of these genres emerged because of new technology that impacted both the writing process and the marketing of finished music. And actually, the similarities go a lot further. So as ridiculous as it sounds, let's take a look at how dubstep was the folk music of its time. On a really broad level, folk music just refers to music made by common people in any culture. American folk is a melting pot of European, African American, and Native American influences. You can hear elements of blues, country, gospel, and worship in a ton of folk songs. Plenty of folk songs have origins that we can't even trace back to an author. We're talking Barbara Allen, Go Tell It on the Mountain, Do Your Ears Hang Low, House of the Rising Sun. Yeah, sorry to burst your bubble, that one wasn't actually written by Five Finger Death Punch. Before recorded music was a thing, songs were typically passed down through oral tradition, which makes it a lot harder to trace back to an original writer. Basically, you had a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds making music not as a career, but just as something to do. And then eventually, capitalism being capitalism, a lot of those earlier uncredited songs were recorded by artists like the Carter Family and John Wilkes Booth. Johnny Cash. While the imagery associated with these artists is the result of cold calculated marketing, they're pulling inspiration from the roots of folk music. This gives us an idea of what was appealing about early American folk music to its listeners. Family and religious values, honest labor, and the preservation of authentic American culture. I tell you what, my sister sure is looking fine today. Now, guitars have been around a really long time. Rob Scallon has a great video on the history of these suckers, but it's like an hour long, so here are the spark notes. We had lutes, then the teardrop shape got squished into an hourglass because acoustics, and by the 1800s, it pretty much evolved into what we call a classical guitar today. A classical guitar is slightly different from an acoustic guitar. The frets are usually a lot chunkier, there's more space between the strings, and the strings themselves are made of nylon. Compared to an acoustic guitar, the timbre is a lot more harp-like. Before nylon was invented, guitar strings were usually made of catgut, and contrary to popular belief, catgut is not made from the intestines of cats. It's made from the intestines of cattle. In the early 1900s, the C.F. Martin Company invented the first vegan strings. They were steel, which gave the instrument a way louder sound and helped evolve the classical guitar into what we now call an acoustic guitar. Before steel string guitars, a lot of American folk musicians were playing on dulcimers. So this new instrument made a big difference in the sound of American folk music. Disassociation with the 20s, depression in the 30s, and dissent about pretty much every military conflict in the 20th century inspired a ton of folk artists, rich and poor. Then the invention of recording technology and the radio meant that a single act could produce an album and sell all across the country. An artist's ability to make money wasn't limited to playing local shows anymore. So you simultaneously have actual hobos going town to town with a beggar's bowl and a sheet of music, and the Carter families of the world putting on a hillbilly look designed to attract common people from all over. A lot of artists that your granddad considers real musicians were pulling off the same mass appeal bullshit that he complains artists do today. Think about it, if the appeal of a genre is its authenticity of its depiction of common people, then the real musicians in that genre are the ones that stayed common, the ones that history forgot. And before we start taking ourselves too seriously, there's plenty of counter-arguments to the idea that a folk musician has to be poor to stay legit. Dude, I love modern commercial folk. I just want to point out that it did reach a point of bastardization because, spoiler alert, dubstep did too. I know you've heard this story before. Artist rises to fame because their lyrics are so relatable to so many people, then the artist completely loses that relatability because of the fame. So, quick recap. Folk music exists on the fault line between a lot of different cultures, largely brought together by imperialism. Louder guitars also emerged around the time of American folk music, which allowed writers and performers to further evolve the genre. New music technology was leveraged, but so was new marketing technology like the radio. Folk's made by commoners, it's been seen as a symbol for the American dream, and most commercial artists are using a degree of corporate leverage that sort of inverts their authenticity as being common. Keep all of these things in mind as we proceed, because guess what? All this shit applies to dubstep too. The year is 1980-something. Jamaican dub music is taking over the UK party scene. Wait a minute, what's Jamaican dub? Okay, the year is 1960-something, and reggae music is a thing. Artists in Jamaica started experimenting with reformatting existing reggae songs into new songs. This was like remixing before remixing was a thing. You could, for example, take the vocals out of an existing song and then emphasize the drum and bass section. You could slow a song down, throw reverb on it, throw delay on it, do like cool DJ stuff, but it's the 60s, so dubbing is the term for copying parts of one song into a new format, hence the terms dub music and Jamaican dub. Dub was also a slang term for... Give it 20 years, and once again, it's 1980-something. Jamaican dub music is taking over the UK party scene. Okay, good. We know what that means now. This is some history my dumb American ass knew nothing about, but until 1973, anyone in the British Commonwealth, including Jamaica, had a right to work and live in the UK. So plenty of Jamaicans opted to migrate and make a better life for themselves up in the mother country. I used to be good at accents, dude. I don't know what happened. Point being, you had a cultural exchange where dub musicians brought their musical influence to a new part of the world. Around the same time, electronic music was getting way easier and cheaper to produce. In 1983, a new technical standard called MIDI emerged that made the whole process much easier. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface and can communicate musical information to computers like pitch or velocity. The upshot of this is you could have one master keyboard to play a bunch of tinier synth modules instead of bringing like 50 keyboards to one show. In 1985, Atari released a line of personal computers that included MIDI as a standard, so studios could compose sequences on the computer and then run them through electronic instruments. You know those player pianos that you can feed music to and they play themselves? This is basically the digital version of that. European electronic music in the 80s also started to incorporate more swing rhythms. Traditionally, you had this sound that was like, and now you're getting people doing this like kind of thing called two-step garage. Could have had a career as a beatboxer. Huh, Jamaican dub. Two-step garage. I wonder where this is going. Now it's 2000 something. I know, we're moving fast. Listen, shit doesn't happen overnight, okay? Electronic producers in America were incorporating punk and metal elements into what was starting to be called dubstep. Skrillex is probably the closest thing that dubstep has to a household name, and before his work with electronic music, he was singing in a metal band called From First to Last. American hardcore influence gave dubstep this intensity and aggression that combined with Jamaican dub and European two-step to create something completely new. By the 2000s, laptops were also small and cheap enough that pretty much anyone could make electronic music. Then SoundCloud debuted in 2007, and pretty much anyone could publish their music. Just as the invention of radio helped folk artists reach new audiences across the country, the rise of internet streaming helped dubstep producers reach new audiences around the world. By this point, though, the genre had reached a point of bastardization. Easier access of music technology means you didn't need as much of an appreciation for or understanding of musical composition to produce music. This isn't really something I have a strong opinion on, but opponents of modern dubstep criticize the aggressive, atonal sounds of Skrillex and his peers and claimed it made the genre entirely too commercial and too generic. Personally, I think that a purist mindset can kind of cause gatekeeping and interfere with the evolution of music, but I'll agree that modern dubstep sounds nothing like Jamaican dub or two-step. So, children, what have we learned today? First of all, where there's a will, there's a way. Anytime music technology becomes cheap enough that amateur musicians can access it, we see an explosion in creativity. Second, we can learn from each other. Cultural exchange leads to the development of new styles and helps us discover a new appreciation for those other cultures. Kumbaya, motherfucker. Third, once a genre becomes big enough, it's inevitably going to come under fire for straying from its roots. Now, let's address the title of this video. Is dubstep really the folk music of its time? Sure, it doesn't sound like Americana, but as we defined earlier, folk music is just music made by common people. Music made by folks. Doesn't matter if you put it on the radio or put it on the internet. Doesn't matter if you stole words from your ancestors or stole samples from your favorite episode of Futurama. Doesn't even matter if you drew the notes in on a computer or made them up on the spot while dying of dysentery. When the aliens find the ruins of our civilization, they're not going to split hairs over whether we played a song around the fire for our 13 siblings or got 13 plays on SoundCloud. They're going to care that you use the song to express yourself about how you're a lone wolf who society doesn't understand. How you're tired of being cooped up around the same people every day and you want to get out and see the world. How everyone in the government is a fascist and you're going to take a stand. Okay, this got morbid and weird. Listen, I guess what I'm trying to say here is we all have the ability and the right to make music no matter what it sounds like. So, love thy neighbor, don't kill anyone, always remember to preheat your oven and defrost your meat, and I'll see you in the next video.